Your question, Father.
Mr. Vidal, though Father Hill and I perhaps are of different persuasion, he's Roman Catholic, I happen to be a priest of the Greek Orthodox Church, and throughout history we may have had some fundamental differences about certain positions. I find it extremely easy to be able to cooperate and work with Father Hill in this area, because I'm very much disturbed by the fact that the statement that you made previously, that people with black leather belts concern only those who have a kind of a taste for this. This sort of goes against our whole concept of what conditioning and what education is for a child, in terms of certain levels of development by which a child is led to acquire certain concepts of life that will enable him to fit into society with a sense of the dignity of human life and all of these values that have been quite precious to man for many, many centuries. And the problem is that always a civilization seems somehow to come to the end of paved road when we can get the kind of pornographic scenes, for example, that you see in the Pompeian vases and this kind of thing.
Now, Pompeii was rather a healthy and vigorous civilization. Now, don't give this my period now.
Indeed.
I won't hear a word against that, and they had a much more honest, direct idea about sex, none of which was dreamed of by those followers of St. Paul who, alas, are still with us and still militating against man's natural energies.
Yeah, but we're talking about essentially Pompeii. We're talking
Pompeii
about
didn't,
Rome.
Pompeii did not collapse.
We're talking about classical Greece. We're talking about the Babylonian civilizations.
Father, have you got a question?
Because
we're running out of time.
I have a question. The question is precisely this: that does not every generation have a responsibility for the education of its younger citizens that involves the transmittal of certain age-old, venerable customs and mores, if you would, and patterns of social behavior that have been tested and that have been found to be of some value in the production of valuable citizens for another generation. And that which you claim appeals only to the man that likes black leather belts does not. It appeals to an entire generation that is exploring a world.
This seems to be more of a sermon than a question, and a very worthy one, but you're making the point that we hand on our tribal knowledge to one another. Indeed we do. But so far, you have not questioned one single first assumption, nor has our friend here, about what kind of a society we should have in a world that's overpopulated, in which your church is dragging its feet very badly, in which 14,000 people starve to death every day, and Pope Paul talks about we must have more visitors to the banquet of life, unquote, that unhappy phrase. So we must begin to see, first of all, you were saying the sanctity of the home, I'm sure, will be the next thing we'll hear. But we have to say, do we need marriage? Do we want marriage now? Shouldn't we limit the number of people allowed to be born? I'm going back to first premises. You're acting as though they're all agreed upon, and we must remove black leather belts because they're untidy.
No, we're not saying that in the least, and that is not the concern here, but we're concerned with a distorted viewpoint of life that you do not hold and that you do not consider good literature or good art or good anything, and that it conveys to young people a distorted image of life that does not exist.
Well, a young person so easily affected by a work of pornography would be a very odd duck indeed who was going to have trouble anyway. People are more resilient than that. First of all, most young people are extremely conformist. They will always act more or less out what their group wants them to be, and we don't have to worry about them. There are a few oddballs that are obviously going to end up raping somebody, and I don't think that your censoring of books, as happy a thought as it is to many people in the United States, to be able to say, no, you cannot publish this book, because I think very often when the church militant over here gets ready on little censorship against pornography, they're really worried about censoring things which may shake people's faith, which they regard really as, and I always come down to that, as being the center of any argument about censorship. And when you get into that, you'd have to discard all the 18th century founders of this country.
This is not at all the point. The point is that a child originally starts eating baby food. because he cannot consume hard meat. You're expecting a youngster of 12, 13, 14 to be able to have the moral discernment of an adult.
Well, I'm not expecting anything. Look, any 12 or 13-year-old should be told everything that there is to know about sex if he's interested. And if he's going to read it in unpleasant little pornographies, that's too bad. I'd rather have him read it in other books. But I want him to know everything. Because that is the beginning of understanding of other people.
He does.
And
this
he
is
doesn't
not
have
understanding.
He's not going to run out and become a rapist because he's read that a man actually went to bed with a woman or actually got into a bathtub with a girl. My golly.
Well, this may lead him into a homosexual experience with another boy.
Well, what's wrong with that in an overpopulated world?
What's wrong with that?
Yes, give me one argument, and God knows the Greek church is, well, we'll say nothing about the Greek church.
You've mixed up your periods a little bit.
The periods, the current metropolitan of Greece has been arrested for that by the Greek junta.
Exactly. He's been arrested because of a perverted act.
He certainly has, but he had been going on for many years.
And disgraced his humanity as well. This is precisely what we're saying, and that we cannot in any way encourage young boys into this kind of relationship. Because we know the scientific studies of homosexualities point out that this is a kind of interrupted ego development. It's.
I think you're on very shaky ground.
I'm not at all on shaky ground, and there are a number of very good works.
I've just come from Athens, where the church is much involved in that, and I can only assume that you're in favor of the junta.
It has got nothing to do with my politics. It's got to do with the homosexuality tendencies of a bishop who should not have been a bishop in the first place.
Yes, well...
We're not condoning that.
I would see absolutely nothing wrong with it.
But this is precisely the kind of a world that we're trying to create where there's nothing wrong for a young child of 9, 10 to become encouraged in homosexual practices.
Who's encouraging anybody? I'm talking about people being told about everything. You have your own narrow views of what is correct sexual behavior. I happen to disagree with it, and I think there are a great many people who do. You have every right to propagandize from the pulpit and give us the same right to propagandize with books. I certainly am not going to try to shut down your church, as appalling as I find your argument. I will just simply try to counter them in literature. I'm certainly not going to organize something like our friend here to censor works and tear down the billboards of the graduate out of the city transit system.
Precisely.
I mean, this is too much.
You are dealing with young children whose impressions are being formed, and I'm sure that you wouldn't encourage your own children in homosexual
There's pathos in your cry there, but neither one of us at the moment is dealing with young children. We're talking about ideas.
Gentlemen, I'm sorry, we've reached the end of our time, but we haven't fully explored the subject. I wonder if you'd both come back and have another go. Will you? Thank you very much. Back in a moment for good night, and come back with us after this message.